Welcome back to another edition of the Raider Take podcast. I am Micah McDonald. With me, as always, is Andy McDonald. Joining us today, very special guest. You have seen him before, heard him before. Marshal Miller, aka Mello. Mello, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. It's good to be back on with you guys. I'm just trying to, become regular enough that I seem like the third brother in this group. I'm trying to grow a beard to fit in. It's like before you know it, I might be a Raiders fan. I'm just thrilled to be on with you guys, though.
Yeah, well, you're a recurring guest, so it's basically whenever we ask you, you have to come on. It's unfortunately.
There were jokes about donating blood or getting my blood checked, social security number. There's a lot that goes into it. To be
minimum requirements, if you ask me, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easier to get a loan than it is to get on this podcast multiple times.
Hey, you should see the waiting list. Well, we appreciate you having on, man, or coming on, man. It's good to have you, and I'm excited to get into some stuff. Obviously, we have Raiders Chiefs this week, so a couple conflicting fan bases that are on this podcast. But before we do that, just want to talk a little bit about what you got going on. So we had you on originally in April, right before the draft. I know we dove into a lot of Mac Jones to the Niners. We all saw how that played out, and just a bunch of different things. So it was cool to have you there. But since then, I know you were doing Mic'd Up. You had your radio show, and I believe in September is when you guys launched your first, your first podcast, your first episode. So is it safe to say that your career took off after you came on this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, things just really started to take off and change, and it was like, oh my God, Mic'd Up's so popular now. We're gonna have to turn this thing into a podcast. But you're right. Last time I was on, it was a radio show, and that's kind of changed and much more comfortable, as you guys probably know, doing a podcast. That's kind of my thing that I've always been more comfortable with. And with radio, it was cool. It's nice to do something live and to be able to react to just all the news that's happening right then. You don't have to worry about like, oh man, this is happening right now, let's talk about it. But it's going to come out in 2 hours. So it was cool to do radio, but it's nice to be back doing podcast. Like you said, Mic'd Up is a daily podcast that we do. You can check it out if your listeners want to. It's a lot of football. It's a lot of randomness too. But we also get into, basketball, baseball, every sport, not just football.
Yeah. No, super cool, man. That's really exciting that you guys have launched that. And obviously you and Big Country, right? It's just you two that rock it.
Yeah. Me and Big Country every day, just sitting down in front of a mic and talking, and who knows what's going to come up when we start doing that.
Could you just describe who Big Country is, just for the fans? Just how does he fall into this? Because as we talked about in the original episode we had with you, how we got to know you, obviously with the Stick to Football. Two Guys in a Girl pod as well. So, but who is Big Country? Everyone's asking, right?
Yeah, I know. I get that all the time. I guess I should do a better job of describing him. I think the nickname really just nails it right there for Big Country. He's a little bit younger than me. He's about 8 years younger than me, I think. But we went to the same school. We're from the same town, and he wanted to get into sports media, I guess you would call it. And so he was a guy that would come on with us when Mic'd Up was a Saturday radio show. So that's what it used to just be on Saturdays, and we did it on radio for like 2 hours. So he kind of started filling in there, and then started getting more and more reps. And then he also kind of decided like, hey, I want to make something of this. I want to start doing it all the time. So he joined us on Mic'd Up for the daily radio, and now we've kind of taken it over and we've made it into the podcast. A fellow Chiefs fan like myself, but it's just him and I talking sports all the time. And like I said, it's so much random stuff. Even, sometimes I'll try to write up the descriptions for the show, or I'll tweet something out and I'm like, what the hell did we talk about today? We had a whole rundown of topics that we were supposed to get to, and we didn't talk about any of it. So that's kind of what happens.
No, it's definitely, you guys are very entertaining, and also just the wide variety of sports you touch on, and also who Kim Kardashian has recently been with. Chris Humphries, by the way, was the big white guy who wasn't good at basketball. So she has progressed since then. But yeah, no, very cool, man. Well, that's awesome, obviously. And we know that you do have more of a focus in college football I'll call you an expert. I'm going to call you my college football expert because I do lean on you for a lot of those things because I dive into the NFL. Micah does the same thing. College football can be tough for me to watch, and obviously it's something that you're focused on. So I believe the rankings haven't been released yet, right? That's tonight.
No, not yet. They'll come out later tonight. It's later this week for some reason than it was last week. I don't know why they do that, but I guess maybe they're trying to get out of the way of college basketball. I'm not sure, but yeah, it'll come out later tonight. They haven't come out yet.
Unlike the MLB, that they're just going to release the Gold Glove winners on Sunday night primetime football. But
right, yeah.
But I was actually
just shitty move.
Yeah, oh yeah, they're just clamoring for attention. Unfortunately, they just don't get the draw that the NFL does. But I was reading actually one of your articles on the NFL Draft Scout. No free ads, but there's a free ad. I don't think Matt needs us to promote him. But I was reading your article about college football rankings, and it looks like, and you had a prediction, I believe, right, for what it's going to come out to, which you had Georgia at 1, Alabama at 2, Oregon 3, Ohio State 4, and then with the 2, 5 and 6 with Oklahoma and Cincinnati. So how do you feel about that? And can you explain to mostly me, but also just the audience around like a Cincinnati team that is undefeated, like how do they get kind of forced out of the top 4?
Yeah, I feel pretty confident in those 4. Those aren't like my predictions. That's not my opinion, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I would do it. But I think that's what's going to happen later tonight with the committee. They seem to like those schools, especially in Oregon, who was already sitting there at number 4. So I think they move up to 3 with Michigan State losing last week. And then with, Cincinnati and Oklahoma, the committee just doesn't seem to like those 2 programs. They're both sitting there. They're undefeated right now. So you would think that they could, get their chance to be ahead of schools like Oregon and Ohio State, but they're still sitting there. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm a Texas fan also, but I do pride myself on not being biased. And looking at what Oklahoma's doing now, I'm really surprised that they're not a top 4 team. They're playing very well. I know they had like a hiccup against Kansas, and people like to poke fun. They're like, oh, they almost lost to Kansas. They won that game by like 12 points. I know Kansas was in it for a little bit, but I mean, Oklahoma was in control of that game the entire time, and they really do look like a different team with Caleb Williams at quarterback. So I'm surprised to see them out. And then with Cincinnati, I think the committee has just decided if you're a group of 5 school, you're not going to be in. So luckily they're moving to the Big 12 soon, but I don't think that the committee is going to look at these group of 5 schools. I think they're almost forcing their hand and saying, if you want to be here, if you want to be in the playoff, you have to go join a bigger conference.
Yeah. Because you have, like you mentioned, Ohio State with a loss, Oregon with a loss. And so with Oregon, it's interesting. Obviously, they're a good team, but is it the politics that are involved to not just be so SEC focused and get some West Coast attention? Or like, where does that – I genuinely – I'm like, I have no idea why. And I couldn't tell anyone what the reason is.
I think it's that Ohio State win. They went into Columbus and they got a win. And they've got a loss on their schedule. I think it was Stanford that they lost to.
Yep. In Stanford, I believe.
Yeah, but they really valued that Ohio State win over a lot of things. And when you look at Oklahoma, like I said, Texas fan, not biased though, but they are undefeated, but they don't have any big quality wins at all. Like when they beat Texas, a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, that's a really good win. Not now. Texas is even 500. So that's not a good win. And some of the other wins that they've had, not good. They get Baylor this weekend. Maybe that could be a good win for them, but I still think that like Baylor's not very good either. Maybe they beat Oklahoma State. That's not a very good win. So I think that with Oregon, they're looking at that and saying, okay, you beat a really good team. Let's value that. So I think that's what this committee is doing, is they're valuing those big wins. Georgia and Alabama, they get those in the SEC. I do think there's a little bit of an SEC bias, but sometimes it's probably warranted. They're really good at football over there. And, it tends to happen that way, that they get weighted a little bit heavier. I am still a little bit surprised to see Alabama at 2 with that loss even. But I do think if we're all being honest, we know that Alabama is definitely a top 2 team. And nobody really wants to play them. I think there are probably even schools out there that say, okay, we want to be ranked number 4. We would rather play Georgia than Alabama. So let's try to get that 4th place ranking.
Right.
That leads me into a question I had. Sorry, how many losses do you think Alabama could have before they're actually out of the top 4? Mine is 5 losses before they're not in the top 4 anymore.
It kind of feels that way at times, for sure. But I can't imagine. But even like I'm sitting here debating it in my mind, if they lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game, there's no way they should be in. But they could be is the problem. I think they could, like, if they lose to Georgia in the SEC championship game and it's really close, the committee will still probably put them in there.
Yeah, that was my question too. Is like, if let's just say Oklahoma loses, they've had tough games, they've had weird wins, obviously throughout. Let's just say they lose, and then Cincinnati stays undefeated throughout, and Oregon stays where they're at, and Bama loses in the SEC championship game. Are they in? Like, Bama's probably in, right? Because they're just going to compare those two. Like, it's really going to be up to Oklahoma. So,
yeah, I think so. Like, assuming one of those Big Ten teams, probably Ohio State, still stays hot and they get a couple wins under their belt too. They're going to have wins against, Michigan State and Michigan. So those are big quality wins. They would probably be in. And then if, Oklahoma does drop a couple games or so, I think if we're sitting here and we're debating an undefeated Cincinnati team or a 2-loss or 3-loss Alabama team, I think Alabama's going to get in. I mean, I know that you're like, they'd probably have to lose 5 games. That might actually be the number that they have to lose. Like, they might have to lose out and not in like close games, and that's never going to happen. But I don't think that they're going to let Cincinnati in. It really sucks too. I'm a fan of the Bearcats and what they're doing this year. They've got a good team. They got a quarterback in Desmond Ridder who's not just like some guy. Like, he might be a first-round quarterback, and he's not getting any credit. Their defense is probably one of the best defenses in the nation, and they're not getting credit either. And I mean, they've got a couple guys, maybe 2 guys that could be first-round picks on their defense, even, and a lot more that are going to be, guys that go to the Senior Bowl that are going to be later round draft picks. So they're a really good program. They're a really good team. The committee is just saying, if you're not in a Power 5 conference, you're not getting in.
Yeah, that's tough, but also perfect transition to our next question is just, obviously you are heavily involved in the NFL draft. You focus on the college football and analyze them and prospects as well, come out with your big boards and everything. So the QB class this year has been notably weak just compared to years past, and also unknown as far as who the QB1 is. I know one of the players you stood on the table for is Carson Strong out of Nevada. So obviously Desmond Ridder is in there, but how do you look at the class there? And maybe, I guess, current state? I know there's so much more that's going to happen from here until April, but how do you look at the QB class right now?
I don't know if this makes me really lazy or really smart, but I haven't changed much of my quarterback rankings this year. I feel like I watched a lot of these guys over the summer and kind of figured out just who they are. And I don't know, Matt, like I said, maybe I'm either really crazy and I'm onto something here, or I'm incredibly lazy. I'm not sure, but I haven't changed it. My opinion's still pretty much the same. I think Carson Strong is still QB1 for me. I watch him play. He's having a really good year. It's at Nevada, so he's not doing anything super exciting. He's not getting a lot of attention. But when I look at those traits of what he's doing and how he's performing, he seems to be quarterback 1 to me. I look at these other guys like Malik Willis, Matt Corral. They haven't done anything to impress me or make me say, oh, man, I need to go back to what I watched this summer. I need to change my mind, because I'm just not seeing it. I'm seeing that, in my opinion, I think a lot of people are trying to make them into draft prospects, and they're just not. Like, there's no way I would draft either one of those guys in the first round. I think they're too inconsistent. Maybe a good quarterback coach, it can get a hold of them and maybe fix some of those accuracy issues. But I don't see it with any of my Sam Howell. He's pretty much done for. Nobody's really talking about him as QB1. We watched the fall of Spencer Rattler. I've never seen anything like that. I was even talking to Matt and Big Country both about it. And I cannot remember when we've ever had a guy be like the consensus number 1 overall prospect. And then in one single season, like 6 games, he's almost undraftable now. I've never seen a player fall like that. Not for, if it were off field related, maybe we've seen something like that.
Right.
But I don't know that I've ever seen it since I've been doing this, see a player fall so far, so fast.
Do you think that was like maybe out of like default because it was such a weak class as far as him being number one? Like Oklahoma guy, like good, but it was kind of like still kind of see where, how does he do this season, see where he's going to go. It wasn't like a Trevor Lawrence or, you know what I mean? Like someone that's a bad comparison maybe, but it's just like by default, he was number one, even though people were kind of, so on the quarterback class in general going into the year.
I know back when I was still doing Two Guys and a Girl pod, we were talking about Spencer Rattler, and I think I pissed off a lot of people. And Matt and Paige even told me, like, "Oh, that's probably going to ruffle some feathers." I had comments about how like Spencer Rattler is just the lazy option for everyone. No one's actually watched him play. All they do is they see the helmet that says Oklahoma on it. They know Lincoln Riley's the coach there. They know he's a big time prospect, so they're putting him number one overall. Like no one who actually watched Spencer Rattler play should have had him number one overall because he's always been bad. He never did anything good at Oklahoma. I mean, I was excited to see him on the field at Oklahoma as a Texas fan. Yeah, so I never understood it. And I know there are a lot of people out there who had him QB1. Like I get the Heisman favorite and that at the beginning of the season, but if you had him QB1 going into the season, like you really gotta question yourself on what you saw on the film because he was bad and he's always been bad. And we talked about it on Mic'd Up too. He's not like a good character guy that you even root for. It's not like he's some extraordinary leader where you're like, oh man, I hope the best for this kid. I mean, he's arrogant. His teammates don't like him. There's video of him just belittling his backup quarterbacks and receivers and blaming losses on them. Like, I don't know him personally, but I feel like I know enough about him to say he's not a good person. So you don't need to root for him. He hasn't been good on the field. And that's why I'm at the point now where I think he's probably undraftable. He needs to transfer somewhere and maybe try to redeem himself.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm going to say you're not lazy. You're just smart because you called it from a mile away with that. And then also Carson Strong as well. So, so this is a very selfish question. I always try to fit some of those self-centered questions into our podcast, but
humble brag?
No, not a humble brag. This is just like, I need help is what it is. I need your help. So I'm going to make a bet tonight. Okay. Tonight. And I'm going to pick the Heisman winner. And when I say I mean you, right? So right now, I don't have your guy. Currently, I don't have your guy, Will Anderson Jr., the D end out of Alabama. He's not on my odds, unfortunately. I'll continue to track that. But right now, I have Bryce Young plus 175. He's odds-on favorite. Kenneth Walker plus 300. CJ Stroud plus 350. Matt Corral plus 550. And then I know Caleb Williams is in there at plus 600. So can you give me a bet? Can you give me my guy tonight?
Tonight, like I think the safe bet, they're not, it's got not a good return on your investment, but I do think it's Bryce Young. I think that he's going to get votes by default. He's going to get votes because people don't know who else to vote for. And they're like, I can't put it on a defensive player. I don't really want to vote for a running back who's not on a good team. So they're going to look at, okay, who's the best team in the league or in the nation? You're going to get the Georgia. Who at Georgia would deserve it? No one. Like, I don't even know who their starting quarterback is going to be on Saturday.
Just the whole defense. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. And so even that defense, it's like, okay, who do you really give it to? We're going to give it to a defensive lineman, like a run stuffer? Probably not. You're not going to give it to a linebacker who hasn't made a ton of plays. So I think the money is with Bryce Young because I do think that people will look at him and say, okay, here's, I guess, the best player on a really good team. So they're going to give it to him. And luckily for him, he's got a lot of recent guys that are in there voting for him from Alabama. So I think it's probably Bryce Young, but I like him. I just don't know that he deserves it to be a Heisman guy. He's having a really good year. He's a good player. He might be the best quarterback in the nation, but I don't know that he deserves the Heisman Trophy over it.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate too with Michigan State losing and Kenneth Walker. Not to say that it's going to take away from any of his performance, but from the spotlight and how they're viewed and everything like that. So, okay. Well, I'll think about it. Okay, I'll think about it. I know there's a lot of time.
Just wait till my guy Will Anderson's up there.
I might just wait till he falls on the book. Yeah.
I do. I really hope that we start giving more guys like him attention. He's been having a fantastic season. He's on a really good team. I think I think it was this past weekend, he had 3 sacks, or maybe it was just 2 sacks.
Mhm.
But I mean, he's having those big moments and big games that you want from a Heisman guy. He just so happens to play defense, and he's a sophomore. So I think that will maybe even hurt his case too. But I think if we're really breaking it down, and I hope more people start to, when you look at who deserves the Heisman Trophy, I do think that it's him. And it's ridiculous that we still aren't looking at defensive guys.
Yeah. Do you think that'll ever change? Like, I mean, I know you guys talked a lot about it on Stick to Football, Two Guys and a Girl as well, but like, do you think that'll ever change where it's just not even fair, right? But like, they have to just have insane seasons to even get on the ballot, even invited to New York,
Charles Woodson needed punt return and kick return stats on his to be able to win it. So
and a little bit of time at receiver.
Yeah.
And even like coming into this season, people were kind of looking at Derek Stingley Jr. And I remember looking at him and being like, okay, they said he might play some receiver, so maybe he can get some votes that way. But I don't know. I hope that they do come around and the Heisman people start looking at defensive players. But I feel like we almost need a meeting that says like, hey, guys, remember, you can vote for defensive players. It is okay. Or maybe like throw out a couple like, hey, here are some guys. I know they released like Heisman watch list and things like that. I guess, maybe it's up to people in, media or journalism or maybe more Twitter users. I don't know, but somebody needs to suggest like, hey, let's get some of these defensive guys in there. Even this year, looking at the draft, the top guys are all on defense. And Kayvon Thibodeau, I don't know that he's had like a Heisman type year, but like he probably should have been getting some attention early on in the year or at least some looks. He's the best draft prospect. He's on a top ranked team and he got no love. If he were a quarterback, he would probably be a shoo-in for the pick right now, but he's a pass rusher, which is still a top 4 most important position in football. Like after quarterback, I think you can argue that pass rusher is the most important position and he's getting no attention. There's a guy in Hamilton at Notre Dame. I mean, he's a star player at Notre Dame. And he can't get love for the Heisman because he plays on the wrong side of the football. So it's pretty ridiculous. I hope it changes.
Is he the safety?
Yeah.
Got
a huge safety too. Like, I mean, he looks like a monster out there. It's ridiculous. And he gets no love, no attention for the Heisman. He had a huge game in week 1, even had 2 interceptions against Florida State. And everybody was talking about him as a draft prospect, which is great. But really, like that could have been a Heisman moment if we would have been talking about that guy.
Yeah, that's frustrating. But one day we'll get him back. We'll get someone on the other side.
It is also still, it's really cool though. I'm a Charles Woodson guy too. Just watching him, it is still really cool to be like, you know what? I saw Charles Woodson play. He's the only defensive player to ever win the Heisman Trophy. Like, not that my daughters will probably care about that, but someday I'll be able to tell them, like, yeah, I saw that. I remember that happening actually.
Yeah. See, Wood, you know how to speak to our hearts. But well, I might be outdated within the last hour, but let's move over to the NFL real quick. And OBJ is unclaimed off waivers. Has he signed? I need to know because from what I know, he hasn't signed.
I haven't seen it yet. He's free to do it, but I haven't seen it yet.
I saw somewhere that they said he was going to take his time as kind of interest formed. Maybe we'll touch a little bit talking about this Raiders-Chiefs thing, but apparently the Chiefs are in the mix now, and I was like, of course they're going to be in the mix now.
You have Josh Gordon,
stupid reason,
okay?
but
move on.
Right. And I've probably said it before to your listeners. I am a Chiefs fan, but I'm also I'm a bandwagon fan. I jumped on in about 2018 or so when their quarterback got there. So I'm also able to recognize some of the ridiculousness that is like Chiefs Twitter. And even there are a couple friends of mine, we're all Chiefs fans, where we'll poke fun at it. It's like, oh my gosh, every time there's a free agent, it doesn't matter who it is. If there's a free agent, you can find some Chiefs blog or media member saying like how he would be a perfect fit for the Chiefs. And that is the exact player that they need to set him over the top. Like it could be a quarterback. Like Cam Newton getting cut. You could still find Chiefs blogs that were like,
we got a package
this is
for
the
Cam
backup
Newton.
we
Don't
need.
worry.
We could play him at tight end. We could do this package with him. Andy Reid would love it. So it can get pretty ridiculous at times. So with Odell, I just don't know. I don't want him. as a Chiefs fan. I think that he's probably a little bit washed up. Maybe he was just unmotivated in Cleveland, but I don't know. I know that I don't want him in that locker room. They've got enough of a mess on their hands right now that they don't need any more distractions.
Just more players fighting fans at that point.
Exactly.
Which I can't say that because of Damon Arnett news, but Micah, where would you, if you're going to predict right now, where would you say OBJ goes before we move on to this Raiders Chiefs preview?
My guess, I've seen a lot of stuff heating up about him going to Seattle, which would be very interesting. I don't know how that works out within that dynamic, but Russ is back. He's coming back. He's been pounding the table for it. I don't really know because he's obviously going to want to go to someone that's a contender. I saw Packers possibly involved, so I guess those two, just because of what I've seen as far as interest goes. But yeah, I guess I don't know. The Packers, I guess, makes sense just because they're hampered by receiver depth in general. So him and Devontae might be kind of wild if he could actually, regain some form of what he used to be. But
yeah, it's kind of hilarious, the whole Seahawks thing, because number one, they're not really a contender, right? You have the Cardinals and the Rams in that division, and number two, like they can't even spread the ball around to Lockett and Metcalf on a consistent basis. It's like they still run the ball for no reason, and so. I get it as far as like they could use them, but it's like, are they going to use them? And they're not really even a contender. So I don't know, but I guess anywhere in the NFC would be fine with me. But the Packers would be fun. Because,
I mean, your Raiders might be a landing spot for
we
him.
got Deshaun Jackson, man. I think we're all right.
Yeah, probably so. But I mean, if I were Odell, I would be looking at the Raiders and saying like that would be a really good landing spot for a team that's competitive, and it probably needs to just upgrade that receiver position, especially now. But I think that it could be a good fit if he wanted to go there. I mean, I do think that he probably wants to go somewhere where he could be kind of the number one-ish receiver, or at least a place that he could get targeted a lot. And, kind of like Micah was saying, I don't know if Seattle's the place for that. They've got two really good receivers. And then with Green Bay, you hear a lot of rumors about Green Bay too. Devontae Adams is a damn good receiver, and him and Aaron Rodgers have a lot of good chemistry. I don't know that he's exactly going to be targeting Odell Beckham a lot if he were to land there too. So I think some sleepers are probably the Raiders and the Ravens to see if maybe one of those two would grab him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we need that in our locker room either at this point with how things are
Could
going on, but it would be very interesting because if, attention and the bright lights like Odell seems to want and need, Vegas is where it's at right now. So that would, I guess that would make sense.
The bridges in New York. So I guess it's Vegas. LA probably doesn't need him. So it's Vegas.
Yeah. Which is interesting because Derek Carr spreads the ball around just as much as anybody. Maybe it's because we don't necessarily have that number one receiver outside of Waller, but Waller's always going to get his touches. Renfro's always going to get his touches. So it definitely would be interesting. And now kind of seeing where Djax fits in, but I don't know. We shall find out.
Could you imagine the conversation with OBJ and Renfro when OBJ's like, hey, I want number 13. and Renfro's like, come on, man. And he's like, I want it. And he's like, I don't know. And then he just like turns him upside down, takes his lunch money, and just like takes the jersey,
Yeah, it's mine.
That's
now.
probably,
I don't know. I bet Renfro's sneaky scrappy. Probably nobody messes with him.
He's probably like the quiet guy at the party. You're like, you just don't want to mess with that guy. He's nice, he's quiet, just don't talk to him.
But he's also so confident.
All day. Yeah, you can talk shit to him all day, and then when he blows up, you're like, oh my god, like no one mess with Renfro. Like that's probably part of the onboarding process with the Raiders. It's like, hey, by the way, like he's crazy. Don't mess with him. There's a reason why he's in the league and he's so good. Like nobody fucks with Renfro. You got to be careful with him around.
There's 2 empty lockers next to his locker, and there's a reason for it. So don't get near him.
Exactly.
You're like him, really?